So, how many of you know that we started Lent already? Any takers? So yes, of course it starts off, as you know, with Ash Wednesday, which just happened this past Wednesday. As we know, we normally use this time as a season to give up certain things that maybe we don't want. Has anybody thought about what they are releasing for this season or fasting from? I wanted to give up lunch meat for Lent, but I just couldn't give up cold turkey. My wife lost my jokes. So yes, on Wednesday, as you know, and there's a few of the traditional Christian faiths that do the Ash Wednesday, where they put the ash on your forehead, and I forgot what they call it, but I found out actually recently. I didn't realize that the clergymen do it also, but not on the forehead. They put it on the crown of the forehead. It has something to do, I guess, because they're constantly prayed up or something to that effect. So just something to think about. So yes, the ashes symbolize repentance. And repentance, metaphysically, if we look at Charles Fillmore's Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, it says repentance is a turning from a belief in sin and error to a belief in God and righteousness. And I like this one as a little nicer, simpler. A reversal of mind and heart in the direction of the all good. So think about it. I'm going to say, like, if you've been like me, and yes, I grew up Catholic. I like to say, thankfully, my parents were not too religious, so I wasn't always going to church. But you still get all that. And we've known that repentance, or at least that's the way they taught it to us, is like, you did something bad, you better make up for it. Repentance here is telling us it's just turning away from whatever it is that you're doing. Turn your mind and heart into something better. I'd like to ask you, just think about it. What would you like to fast from this Lenten season? But before you really consider that answer, let's go through what Charles Fillmore talks about what Lent is. And there's a book that he's got called Keep a True Lent, where he goes through everything that he understands what Lent is about, all the different days, all the 40 days plus the Sundays. For some reason, we don't count the Sundays. It has something to do with that Sundays is supposed to be a day of celebration, so they don't count the 40 days in there for the Lent. Charles Fillmore says that Lent is a season of prayer and fasting. Lent is embodying the idea of cleansing and disciplining both mind and body toward the end of making them more receptive to the Christ ideas. Keeping Lent in the truest Christian spirit, follows the way of prayer and fasting. It's not about, giving up candy or chocolate or coffee or whatever it is. He goes on to say that Jesus revealed to his disciples that prayer and fasting are the sure way to spiritual power. Think about that. A simple thing that, and I'll speak for myself, I don't always remember to keep with my prayer and fasting, but if I want some kind of spiritual power, It seems simple enough. Maybe it's not easy, but something to consider. He goes on to say that Jesus revealed that fasting, like prayer, is a matter between man and his maker. So it's not about, oh, look, I'm fasting, and that's why I look pale and this and that. And we know that Jesus mentions it to the disciples. Similar to what he said about prayer. Go into your secret room and pray with God, right? In abstinence from worldly things, the mind must be filled with thoughts of God. Else, there is no spiritual value in fasting. So this is about, it's not just, oh, I'm going to give up chocolate or any kind of sweets or anything like that. It's, I am going to be doing my prayer and my fasting. And yes, if you want to give up something like that, because that's part of the physicalness that we're here, it reminds me, a while back, I decided for 40 days, well, technically 46, I guess, to give up all solid foods. And all I was doing was drinking liquids, juices, and for the soup, it was just the broth that I would have, and water, of course. And I did that for the whole Lenten season. And part of the thought why I was doing that is like, if I do it during this time, there are other people doing it also. And as they say, there's strength in numbers. And even though I may not know who's doing what, just that energy that's around about the fasting. And I did it, and it wasn't, like I said, just about giving up the solid foods. I was also coming to church. At the time, we had the Wednesday night classes. I would come to the Wednesday night classes. I actually used to help with the AV in the back. And I remember one of those days, I am up in the back there just helping out during one of the classes in the middle of Lent, during my fast. And I had always complained that being back there, you don't seem, well, at least at the time for me, I didn't seem to get that same feeling, energy of being directly here in the pews, listening to the minister during the class. But that one day I remember being back there, and I kid you not, to me, the whole class, which was a full hour and a half, felt like this long meditation. I was just getting everything, and everything just flowing through me. So just something to think about. You want whatever it is that you're doing, how simple it is. If you're giving up candy, at least do it mindfully and think about it, that it's not just about giving up something physical, but what is it that you want to incorporate into your prayer and your fasting, of course. I like the way he says this here. To observe Lent according to the Spirit rather than the letter, we must learn to fast from all unworthy thoughts and feast on the good and the true. We must fast from criticism and condemnation and feast on brotherly love. Fast from false beliefs in sickness and weakness, and feast on the truth of God's omnipresent, perfect life. One more. Fast from false beliefs in lack and limitation, and feast on the truth of God's bountiful good will. How's that sound? So instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to be fasting, and I got to give up something, think of it as you're fasting from something, but you're feasting from something better. So instead of focusing on what you're giving up, focus on what's going to come to you that will just help you, not just physically, not just mentally or psychologically, but also spiritually. So like everything else, it's just a matter of what we focus on. Instead of focusing what you're giving up, focus on the possibility of what's coming your way, even though you don't know what that might be. Traditionally, Lent is about, we focus on the 40 days that Jesus went into the wilderness. But actually, it started before that. Moses received the 10 Commandments at the conclusion of his prayer and fasting when he was in the desert. Elijah talked with God on Mount Horeb at the conclusion of his prayer and fasting. And if you don't remember or know the story of Elijah about how he was talking to God, it's interesting that he goes up to the mountain and it talks about how there was this massive gust of wind. God wasn't there. There was an earthquake. God wasn't there. And there was this fire, and God wasn't there. And then there was sheer silence. And that's where God was. So think about that. When we do prayer and meditation, you've heard us say before, we talk about that when you pray, you're talking to God. And when you meditate, you're listening to God, right? So let's get back to Jesus, his 40 days in the wilderness. And of course, in the Bible, the 40 days has to do with a time of preparation, a time of completion. So throughout the Bible, we hear always about 40 days for this, 40 days for that. And to the Hebrews, that was just a number of preparation, a number of completion. So I'll read on Matthew 4, verses 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. Listen that it says that Jesus was led up by the Spirit. So we think of the Spirit as something good. So why is the Spirit leading Jesus to the desert? Well, let's find out. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterward he was vanished. I can't read today. And afterward he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command those stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, and so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, and he said to them, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only Him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. So all this tells me that, and this of course was, he started his ministry right after this. To me, this tells me that whether we like it or not, we're here to go through a process. I see it as we need to show that we are deserving of whatever it is that we think we're supposed to do in this world. When you find your passion, it's not necessarily that things become easy. I'm sure you've experienced something in your life. You think, oh yeah, I found my passion and this is what I'm going to do, but what is it that you really have to do to keep working your passion? You need to really go at it. During my whole, you've heard me say this before, my ministerial school, there were a couple or 3 times where it was just so much for me to keep up, because I've said it before, I was a full-time dad, a full-time husband, I had a full-time job, plus I was taking full-time credits. And there were a couple of times where I truly had to go into prayer and really consider, is this really for me? Can I really keep going? And without going into more detail, one of the things that came up for me during meditation and after journaling on it is that it sounded odd to me, but in a way I understand it, that it was more dangerous for me to stop than to keep going. So think about if Jesus had given up in the wilderness when the devil was tempting him, we may not be experiencing what we are experiencing now. And this is what, over 2,000 years later, that this all happened. So yes, if you're going through some trials and tribulations, consider what is it that you are supposed to learn from this so you can move forward. Not focusing on, why is this happening to me? Why am I being tempted? Why am I being tested? But what is this helping me with? How is this making me stronger? Just yesterday I went to a workshop with a very successful Unity minister from the Unity of Houston, Michael Gott. And since I started listening to his stuff, I'm like, he's really good and he knows what he's talking about. So it just so happens he was going to be in Florida, still a couple of hours away from here, doing a workshop. So I'm like, I got to go see him. And it was just a very simple workshop that he did, but by the end of it, it just reinforced in me that everything that I've been through, all those hard times, all those moments of wanting to give up, all those moments of, I'm not sure that I'm supposed to be doing this, I'm not sure that I'm worthy enough. It just reinforced that this was for me to be doing. I was able to share that with him at the end of the workshop. And it's interesting how coincidental things are. He didn't go into much detail, but apparently he's had some similar things that I may have gone through. And I know we all have. I mean, there's a reason why we're here. I think for me, the main reason why I ended up in Unity is because I knew there was something better. I knew there was something different. And I've had that throughout my life. And it worked, I guess, it worked out good for me that, as a lot of you know, I'm originally from Colombia, South America, if you don't know. And I was 13 when my parents brought us to the States, New York, Brooklyn to be exact. And I spent 14 years there, and then I ended up in Orlando. And all those moves that I had in my life, it just kept going back to me. It's like, I don't feel like I belong here. When I left Colombia, I'm in New York, I'm like, I just don't belong here. And a couple of years after being in the States, I go back to visit, and I was there for a whole month. But lo and behold, when I went back, I didn't feel like I belonged anymore. So it's like, where do I belong? one of those things, I've had little moments like this. The moment I arrived in New York, something in my mind said, one day I am going to leave New York. And then I end up in Orlando. But what I did when I arrived in Orlando, I thought to myself, you know what? Enough of this feeling bad about things. I am going to have fun. And it worked out. I started having fun. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up here. Yes, because I started working on myself, on my spiritual work, of course, and I end up here thinking that I was finding this church because I wanted my little girls to have a place to go to church. Little did I know that it was meant for me, more so, I guess, than for them. I hope that they're in their mid-20s, and if you know anything about the age, that's the time when you kind of like, that's the time I disappear from the church. But around 25, 26, that's when I started looking, okay, what is it that I need to be looking for? I like to say that, well, in New York, I attempted to become a musician, and I did that for a few years. And yes, I love music, but when I found spiritual work, that's when I found my passion. So I'm just glad to be here. So I want you to consider, instead of worrying about what you're fasting from, what is it that you want to feast on? First of all, let me read this so I can get us to where I want to be. This is about Jesus praying in Gethsemane, right before he's about to be crucified. And we read, then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over and pray. He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee. I like to mention here that he normally would take those three whenever he went out to pray or do something. Peter and the two sons of Zebedee are James and John. If you know anything about our 12 powers, Peter relates to faith, John relates to love, and James relates to wisdom. So think about that. Jesus would take faith, love, and wisdom to pray with him. Something to think about. So he began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me. And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. This is where I got the title for my talk. So I simplified it by saying, let not this cup pass from me. So he's saying he doesn't want to do it, but he's saying, but God, if it's your will, let me do it. So let not this cup pass from you. Whatever you may be going through right now, for one thing, it's not going to last forever. But if you hold on to what am I supposed to be learning from this, you might start to see a different story in your mind about why all that is happening. So I'd like you guys to think back for a moment. If I can have you, if you don't mind, just close your eyes for a moment and just think back on your life. Any hard times that you've had, any challenges, and think of one, pick one, and trust that whichever one that is, that's the one you're supposed to be considering right now. Now think about that challenge and how, after all that happened, did it work to help you with your health, with your physical aspect? Did it help with your mental aspect or psychological aspect? Or even, did it help you grow spiritually? Just consider that for a moment. And just say to yourselves, I am grateful that I went through this. Let's say that together. I am grateful that I went through this. So yeah, as I mentioned, I've had my challenges as well. When I went through my medical concern a couple of years ago, thankfully I'm free and clear of all that right now, I had to consider that. What is it that I'm supposed to be learning from this? And there was something that in me, I'm like, did I make this happen for myself? Because I appreciate it when you hear or read these books from these people that have become enlightened, if you will. And you always hear that they went through some kind of issue, a challenge. And silly me, I thought, oh, maybe I'm supposed to have something like that. And guess what? I did. I had colon cancer, and it took me 3 years to get through all that experience. And for one thing, it made me be more committed to doing this. That is the reason why I retired from my official job this past July, because after that I knew that I needed to focus on following on my spiritual work, on ministry in whatever the way that looks for me. So Lent is not just about fasting from anything negative, but focusing on what's the positive that's going to come out of it. Another way to look at it, think about it this way. When you're just fasting from something, and if you're getting rid of something, now there's an empty space there, isn't there? It was the Greek philosopher Aristotle that said, nature abhors a vacuum. So if you're releasing something, make it a conscious decision to bring something new into it. It goes on to say that the universe, because the reason this happens, the universe has to maintain equilibrium. And yes, we're here in this world of duality. You know, we got day and night, up and down, left and right, you name it. So if you release something, make sure you bring something new into your thoughts, into your presence. There's something else that even though I said, we focus on fasting from certain things during the Lent season, how about if we consider not waiting for Lent to come around, since it only comes once a year, right? But anytime that you think of something that you need to release, start right there. It could be in the middle of summer. Say to yourself, I'm going to do 40 days of fasting so that I can feast on something. And as Charles Fillmore tells us, it's not just about releasing something, but focusing on prayer and meditation. Start focusing on what it is that you want to be praying on constantly, and at the same time, listening for the answer, meditating on it. I actually was going to mention, but I'll mention it now. I was forgetting to mention one of the Unity ministers, and I'm forgetting his name right now, Christopher Ian Chenoweth. he had a nice acronym for Lent, L-E-N-T. And you may have heard this one before. Let's eliminate negative thinking. Consider that. If that's all you do, eliminate negative thinking. So I'd like to add to that. And I'll switch it around a little bit. Let's eliminate negative thoughts. And now let's fill in. Let's encourage new thoughts. So let's eliminate negative thoughts. Let's encourage new thoughts. Yes, and we have to remember that we must fast from criticism and condemnation and feast on brotherly love. Consider that. If you focus on feasting on brotherly love, it won't be so easy to condemn somebody or criticize somebody. And yes, think to yourselves, let not this cup pass from me. Welcome that cup, because, and I know, I forget her name, she did a song about it too. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So let's grow spiritually. Let's use that acronym of Lent. Let's eliminate negative thoughts, and let's encourage. Did I say that wrong? Let's encourage new thoughts. Let's encourage new thoughts. Let's say that together. Let's encourage new thoughts.